Hello, this is Howard Rubin. As I've said many times, I'm known for my work in technology economics, and this is part of the Inconvenient Truth series. And I've already discussed that if you've heard it, the inconvenient truths of using certain metrics for benchmarking. Well, there's another set of metrics that are the inconvenient truth that has to do with their ambiguity, and they're a structure that I developed probably in the 1990s, actually with a colleague, Dale Kutnick, who was coming into Meta Group, or was at Meta Group at the time, and it was the run versus change model. Nicely enough, CIO magazine and Gary Beach wrote about that was a big breakthrough to look at a portfolio approach to where your IT spending is going, because run would be what you're spending to keep the lights on, and change would have to do with what you're doing for investment. And change has two subcategories, and they were what are you spending to grow the business and transform the business. And that sort of sounds wonderful, but the inconvenient truth is those terms are pretty ambiguous and used loosely by firms, not intentionally as a problem, but you can look at some firms that in run include their cyber spend, other places it's in the change. And you look at a wonderful example of how it gets used. The 2022 Investor Day report from JP Morgan basically looked at their global technology and said, here's what we have in run. And they defined their run. Their run was their infrastructure, software licenses, and application support. And they defined their investment, which would be change, in a bunch of categories, which was everything in investments in platforms, investments in even their cybersecurity up there. It was the early days of their AI efforts. So it was about data was a category and then a few categories of investment. And that added some transparency. The brilliant thing that they did actually is when they looked at their investment, not only did it by category of that form, but then they rotated it and you can see where the money was going into different businesses. So in fact, an inconvenient truth, and this is a weird one, is that run versus change is used very widely. It has very loose meaning because of the issue and the ambiguity of the terms and how people classify them, even with structures around them. And the issue is then what do you do about it? Well, if you think about the basics of, and we'll look for pro-profit businesses, how they compete. There was a wonderful book by Tracy and Wordsworth called Discipline of Market Leaders, and says, if you're looking for business levers, it has to do with operational efficiency, excellence, it has to do with customer intimacy, and has to do with product leadership. So if you start thinking about categorizing and taking a deeper view of your run versus change, that has a lot to do with your operational efficiency and excellence and a whole bunch of things over there. And what does that do? That helps you avoid cost. The overall picture of where money might go, other than avoiding cost, is reducing cost. And the other part of where money might go, and we'll go to a whole bunch of categories shortly, would have to be to grow revenue, to protect revenue, to manage risk. It has to do with employee development, retention, and a whole bunch of other things, in addition to metrics that have to do with your customer net promoter score and things like that, and retention and turnover and pieces like that, and product leadership, which have to do with getting product to market and getting them recognized into your customer and making money from them. So the thing you should start to think about is getting more granularity into the categories you have for run versus change. And as a matter of fact, if we even go outside the for-profit sector and we look at governments and their investments in technology, what does that impact? Well, loosely, it will impact health, education, welfare, defense, and other categories. And what are the key metrics around those? So this is a high level guidance, but the inconvenient truth is run versus change is pretty ambiguous. Number one, the categories of run, which is keep the lights on, grow and transform. Grow has to do with the investing to grow existing businesses or modify them. And transform really was defined to say what technology you're using which change the business work. But start thinking about keeping those categories as sort of the lingua franca, making sure you have your definitions very clear, but expand out to business facing metrics. Again, basics have to do, if you're doing something, it relates to the business cases, and business cases are not orthogonal, but in fact, it can look about growing revenue, protecting revenue, avoiding costs, reducing costs, managing risk, engaging the customer, and so on. So sort of the next stage of this, and we'll spend more time on it, but really the inconvenient truth has to do with ambiguity. Fixing that has to do with clearing up the ambiguity and expanding out to business-facing categories, which have to do with value. And that is even far more critical today in the world of what the heck are you doing with AI, and where is that going to show up? Because there's a whole bunch of arguments right now with regard to there's no return on AI, you can't measure the results. Well, if everybody's talking about productivity and revenue growth and a whole bunch of other things, organizational efficiency, there are all sorts of ways of measuring those things. And we'll get into that another time. But this is about the inconvenient truth, and run versus change is right in there because they're out there, but the ambiguity causes problems, especially in comparison. And when you're trying to talk to investors or analysts in business terms, that just doesn't go far enough. We're looking for outcomes, and that is the essence of technology economics. So keep looking at our series on inconvenient truths. We'll expand on the details, and our website will have far more. Thanks a lot. Looking forward to the next time.